Thank you. I'm going to invite Father Mark to come up at this time.
Wow, that's nice. Whenever the priests get applauded after their ordination, I always tell them enjoy it because it may not last. So I was asked to give just a little bit of a context for what we're doing today, the convocation, and for those who perhaps were not in attendance in this large diocesan convocation we had in 2019. What we are doing today actually has roots even before that, where our coming together and practicing what is in effect a synodal process. And Archbishop Naumann in 2014 and 2015 created a team to come together and to implement town hall meetings, listening sessions throughout the diocese, to come up with the 3 super priorities or initiatives that would be keep us busy for the next 10 years. And at the very top of those was evangelization and the need for us to reach out and to practice and to create a culture of evangelization in our archdiocese. And what we're doing today is kind of, it's the next iteration of that, especially with Archbishop McKnight helping us refine and understand and implement the whole process of synodality under the inspiration of Pope Francis and Pope Leo XIV, building on, of course, all that St. John Paul II did, and Pope Benedict as well. So that's a little background context for what we're doing today. And then this, I was visiting with Helen there. We want to thank you all for allowing us to listen, allowing us to be part of this listening process. It's a bit chaotic, and it's a bit, it can be hard to keep up with, and it can be challenging. So thank you for that. What this panel that we are about to participate in now is a chance to respond to questions that you all have submitted. So tried to organize those, collate those, put those into different categories. And so I think we're ready to have the panel come out, and I believe Marissa's going to introduce who the panel is. There's all kinds of microphones here. Have a microphone.
All right, testing. Can you hear me? In the back? All right. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you again. I am Marissa Easter. I am the Director of Communications. And today we have a panel based on the questions that you submitted. So if my panelists can go ahead and come on out. So I hope in between now and then, yes, let's give them a hand.
They sent me out first because I'm officially the old guy on the panel, so with the most institutional memory, so I'll do the best I can.
Yes, we call that expertise. Thank you. Okay, so I hope you all had a chance to grab lunch and reflect on what we just talked about. Archbishop McKnight and Helen gave us a lot to think about. Ideas about synodality, parish mission, and how we all live in faith in a community. So we asked you to find or to tell us what you found encouraging, challenging, and then give some questions to the panel, and that's what we're going to be discussing right now. But before we do that, I'm very excited to introduce our panelists. All of these are probably very familiar faces. So first we have Archbishop Sean McKnight, our visionary leader. Then we have Helen Osman, our consultant and pastoral communications specialist. Father Anthony Psyche, who is our new chancellor and promoter of justice. And then last but certainly not least, Father Mark. I know. We all know who the favorite is. No offense, guys. It's Father Mark Murtis, who is our new Vicar General and Vicar for Clergy, and formerly our moderator of the Curia. So if we could all now give them a big round of applause. Okay, so our panelists are here today to respond to your questions.
And this is Marissa Easter, our Director of Communications,
yes,
who we are very happy to have on board.
Thank you. So you know what? Let's just go ahead and dive on in. All right, Archbishop McKnight, you are up first. One phrase that caught people's attention was reviewing parish boundaries for mission effectiveness. Yeah, I'm seeing nods. Can you unpack what that means, Archbishop, and what it doesn't mean?
Testing. It is on. Very good. Well, I don't know exactly. And that's the point. But I do know this is a concern of a lot of people, especially in smaller parishes or parishes that have undergone some great demographic changes, concern about the vitality, the viability of their parishes. What is the new archbishop going to do? Is he going to close us down? It just in general, I am not concerned. I don't want to be concerned about merely the bottom line in addressing those kinds of questions. I choose, rather, to focus more intently upon how well does a parish function? And if not, why not? And so my first impression and encouragement is for people to evaluate and to look at what their parish is doing and not doing, and to make sure that they are fulfilling all of the services, is one way to put it, that the church expects a parish to provide its own people. And whether that's the formation of our youth and the evangelization of people, the preparation for the sacraments, marriage included. How well does the parish do that? And then also in terms of our works of charity and mercy as being a part of the proclamation of the gospel. It's not just the words we use, but it's our actions too, right? All of that should be seen in its totality. And one important element of that is to look at whether or not perhaps parish boundaries, the very territory that a parish community is responsible for, perhaps it needs to be reconfigured in light of present circumstances. So that's where I would rather begin and look at it in terms of mission effectiveness and what is optimal for the church's mission, universal as well as in that parish, for it to be fulfilled.
Thank you, Archbishop. So, Father Mark, you've seen parish life evolve over the years. How do you see mission effectiveness playing out practically and pastorally in our archdiocese?
Thank you for that sensitive question. Over the years, that means I've been doing it a while, so that's... I recall, I believe it was Archbishop Kelleher who had, with Father Tom Tank and other leaders, came up with benchmarks for vitality. Someone might help me remember when that specifically occurred. But a benchmark for vitality for a parish, and it had to do with some of the things that Archbishop just talked about, the ability to provide the services, and those benchmarks for vitality that were offered then, they became a guideline for how you decide back in pastoral planning in the 1990s and in the 2000s. It was part of how we decided if parishes were clustered, if a parish was closed. Archbishop Naumann basically received and took the recommendations that had come from that process and maintained those, and had a point of view and an attitude very similar to Archbishop McKnight in terms of it's really, Archbishop Naumann, I believe, would say, I don't close a parish. A parish basically is no longer able to support itself, so it becomes a decision of the local population. All that being said, mission effectiveness, and I've heard Archbishop Naumann say this a number of times. He reminds parishes that it is the role of the parish, it is the role of the parishioners to put into place the life and the plan of Christ and make that a reality for the parish community, and I think that's how he led us over the years. So I don't know if I've answered the question very well, but I think that's what I have for right now.
Yes, excellently done. So this is really a path forward to vitality. So our next question, one of the questions we received had to do with division, especially around liturgy, like the Latin Mass versus Novus Ordo. Father Psyche, from your perspective, how can a synodal approach help us listen to one another across these differences?
Well, it's a very sensitive question. Liturgy is a very personal thing in so many ways, ironically, because it's the public prayer of the church. It belongs to the entire church, And if you've ever looked at a Roman Missal, I mean, there's rubrics, guides. This is how the church wants us to pray the Mass. We've all have a lot of strong feelings about how we prefer to pray. And a lot of times when we come up against somebody who prays differently than we do, or has different liturgical preferences, I know in my own heart, my own soul, I can feel defensive. I can feel walls go up. And I was really inspired by a conversation the priest had on the Presbyteral Council just a couple of weeks ago. Archbishop McKnight actually facilitated a conversation on liturgical questions. And it was just so open, it was so free, it was disarming. Every priest shared their perspective. We had the entire spectrum of opinions represented in that room. Everybody was heard. All their preferences, opinions, concerns were all validated. And there was just this sense of openness. And there was this sense of, okay, we need to unpack this more. We need to have more conversations about this, and so I would say for us in our parishes, just ask our brothers and sisters, why would you prefer that? What's the symbolism behind that? What's the meaning behind that? Try to learn where the different preferences come from. And in that learning the why, maybe appreciating, is this something I can incorporate into my preferences? Is this something I need to be more open about? And recognizing this is the place of unity. This is where we come together and pray as the body of Christ. It shouldn't be a place of division. And so to take down the walls, to hear each other, and to recognize we have a lot of options in our liturgy, we have a lot of options in the Roman Missal, and to validate the experiences of others in that. But to recognize too, it's not our thing. The liturgy is not our thing, it's the church's, it's God's. He's given it to us, it's a gift to us. And thanks be to God, we get to engage in it. So my encouragement and what I'm going through myself is just to let the walls come down and ask that question, why? Why is this preference there? Why do people like that? And then why do I have these preferences myself? And to just be open to how God's going to speak through that. But I felt very validated in the conversation the Archbishop facilitated in the Presbyteral Council. I can't speak for all the priests that were there. I mean, I'm the chairman of the Presbyteral Council, so I guess technically I can. But I think honestly, it was disarming how open the conversation was. There was a lot of authenticity in that room. And I don't think anybody's feelings were hurt. I think it was this sense of we have to keep discerning. We have to keep discussing this. And we have to keep studying. What does the church actually call us to?
Yeah, that was beautifully said, and thank you for breaking it down to the individual level. So I hope everybody walks away and really thinks, what does that mean for me specifically? So on that note, Archbishop, how does this work practically in our archdiocese in a way that unites rather than divides?
Unity is the purpose of this. This whole synodal effort is for the communion of the church such that we are more capable then of fulfilling our mission, right? Communion and mission go together. And so liturgy is a lightning rod subject. I served for a time as the director of liturgy for the Diocese of Wichita, and after that, as the director of liturgy at a seminary. And in a closed environment like that, it is a huge bone of contention where there are lots of opinions, even with people who are of the same general category. We still find ways of having differences no matter what, likes and dislikes. But what Father Psyche had said about listening, really entering into a dialogue, requires a lot of humility and the ability to sort of let down and detach yourself from preconceived notions and categorizing and labeling people in positions as if you already know them all and you fully understand. Sometimes you don't get the affective dimension of where they're coming from. And that's why that's important to listen to as well. That's a truth, if you will, regardless. But one layer that I need to remind everyone of, and Father pointed this out as well, the liturgy is not what we get to do with it. It's the prayer of the church as given to us. A prayer that the church expects the priest and the people locally to adapt it according to their situation. So there are decisions that have to be made regarding style, what kind of music, what kind of art is involved, and so forth. But The role I play is not only to make sure we have healthy, good discernment about these important questions within our one local church. It's my job to make sure our local church doesn't go off in its own direction or away from the rest of the church. And so I'm here, in part, to remind us all of the standards that are given a priori. The requirements that we have of communion with the universal church, especially our Holy Father, Pope Leo, and to make sure that what we discern is in keeping with the demands of our universal church.
Thank you, Archbishop. So in terms of the priest and laity working together, Helen, several questions raise the challenge of listening while maintaining proper parish authority. For example, parish staff sometimes feels torn between what the pastor wants and what parishioners are asking. How can parish leadership foster a culture where all voices are heard while avoiding clericalism?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Because, I mean, it's similar to diocesan staff, right? You know, you've got the boss, who also happens to be your pastor, and then you have the people of God for the reason why the church is there. I think Archbishop really laid it out well in describing the charismatic authority of the church and the hierarchical. So let me give you a practical example maybe of this based on one experience I had. When we did the listening sessions in the Diocese of Jefferson City, without going too much in the detail, I had scheduled a session for a parish, basically a rural parish. We asked people to register ahead of time just so I could have plenty of facilitators, etc. It was early on a Saturday morning in February, and I had to drive a ways to get there, and only 5 people had registered. So I was not happy. Let me just put it that way. When I arrived, tried to put all that aside. So we were going to meet in the church. That was the facility we had, and people started coming in, and all of a sudden I realized I had more than 5 people in the church. There were about 12 people in the church. And so to honor the process, we were to be in small groups of 10 or less. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to go find a couple of parish staff to help me do the facilitating, right? So more people keep coming, and now I'm having to go find chairs because we can't set up enough with the pews there to keep it. Finally, we get settled. There's about 40 people in the church. And I take the group that's closest to the front of, the vestibule where people could normally come in. So I still get people drifting in as we're talking. And the rules of the session are each person has 2 minutes to answer a question, and everyone else is to listen to them. So as we're moving through the process, and out of this corner of my eye, I see this older man coming in, white gentleman. I mean, looked just like everybody else in the parish, okay? So probably in his 60s maybe. He sits over at the edge, and everyone's talking about how great the parish is, how welcoming it is, how they've had all their children go to the school. I mean, it's just a beautiful place. And the pastor happens to be in the group that I'm facilitating. And part of the process is silence so that the Spirit can speak. And so everyone finishes, and there's a couple of pauses, and somebody else says something, and then there's another pause. And then this gentleman literally on the edge of the group starts talking. And he talks about how he grew up in that parish. And he got married in that parish, and he had sent his kids to that parish. And then they moved, and his wife died, and he came back to town, and quit going to church for lots of reasons. And then he was talking with a friend of his a few years ago, and the friend said, why don't you start going back to church again? Try it. And he's like, yeah, I can do that. And then he said, And I came here for 3 years and had no one come and approach me until last Advent, when somebody came to me and invited me to take part in an Advent small group sharing experience. And there was silence. And I was so thankful the pastor did not say anything. After that, the pastor came up to me and he said, Helen, I know you're doing this for, the diocese and the synod and all that, but can I have everything that you're collecting? And I said, yes, absolutely. And he took that to his parish staff and to his pastoral council and said, we're not as good as what we think we are. What are we doing that we could be doing better? And that's just one example of a way where, again, it's not who gets to decide, but it's, are we really listening to the people who are already here? Not to mention those who don't even have the courage to come in the doors, right? I hope that's helpful in addressing that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So, Archbishop, how do you see this dynamic in a way that keeps people engaged, even when decisions may not align with everyone's preference?
And that's the most important time, is when there isn't common agreement, to have that kind of level of discussion and discernment and listening, as the ground rules typically are 2 minutes to speak, a little bit of silence before the next person speaks. The other element is you're not allowed to react to what somebody has said, either in favor of or against. You just got to let it sit and be as it is. And so the example that Helen gave of that man, it wasn't about a particular policy, or it certainly wasn't about anything doctrinal, but it was how they were being church. And they had an idea. For some of them, it was a great parish, perhaps because they had children in the school and there's that natural community that kind of gets going and within that group, but not for everybody. And if you're not aware of that, if you don't see it or hear it, you're not going to know about it. So I think that's more of the example of what we mean by a conversion of how we are church, going from mere maintenance to actually seeking out the lost, those on the periphery, those that are invisible to us, and yet they are within our parish territory. Maybe we're only serving those who actually come on Sunday. Well, that's automatically cutting off a large number of our parishioners. As we know, not every Catholic goes to Mass on Sunday, although they should. And then beyond the Catholics, everyone else is part of the mission field, right? And so are we trying everything possible to proclaim the kingdom of God to the poor in spirit? And I think that's, if that's our goal, and we are doing that, and you as a parishioner feel engaged in that there is this kind of discernment going on in your parish, and you have the opportunity to get off your chest what's really been burdening you, and perhaps as one listening session that I participated in, one fella just thanked me profusely, which I wasn't deserving of the thanks, but he said, this is the first time in my 30-some years of being an adult in this church that anyone has ever asked me my opinion. So just the very genuinely asking what people think means you have to listen as well. You have to take it in. Doesn't mean we have to agree with what everybody says, nor is it trying to find the common denominator, the least, objectionable position. That's not what it's about. But it is listening and having that make an impact upon the important decisions that are made by our church.
Yeah, thank you both. It's interesting how sometimes it's just a simple question, right? Just listening a little bit longer, a little bit deeper. So, Father Mark, some of our pastors may be newer to this concept. How would you advise training them or helping them to discern and foster synodality within their parishes?
Well, I think first thing is we just can't be afraid of the word. Synodality essentially is active listening, which is, in my own personal life, and thinking about the practice of being a spiritual helper, a spiritual guide, someone who walks with people. It truly begins with active listening, I've even come to say personally, I don't believe I preach this, but in my heart of hearts, I think that active listening is perhaps the best incarnation of Christ that it's certainly the most practical incarnation of Christ that we can do all throughout our lives at any time, in any moment. It's the most accessible road to holiness. So how can be people encouraged in that? Well, priests specifically, I'm now the vicar for clergy, so I can get on my soapbox. I think it's a good opportunity for clerics, for priests, to have opportunities, small groups in which we can do that. That's why I'm so supportive of and have been a part of Jesus Caritas Fraternity of Priests, because it's founded on that principle that Christ is revealed in our hearing of other people telling their story of faith. And active listening is just about the most beautiful thing that we can do. And that's not for priests, that's for any spouse, for any person in a relationship, for any parent. So how can we get priests to and clergy persons to feel that, have that experience? Perhaps the best thing to do is to begin by listening to them. So by making it possible, and again, now speaking in my newest role as vicar for clergy, how can we make sure that each clergy person is being listened to and is being heard? So that I just gave myself a job, I guess. So there.
You're hired. Okay, so you mentioned active listening a lot, and sometimes that can be challenging, especially when you're in parish councils. So Helen, my next question is for you. How would you advise avoiding echo chambers in councils and hearing diverse verses, especially when some of those voices may be a little bit louder than others?
I think it starts, again, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, right? For the lay leadership to really receive some formation in understanding what is their role in that council. It's not to bring in their own agenda. It's to understand what it means to be Catholic and what it means to be on that council, which is, I love the fact that we call our leader the Holy Father. I also love the fact that Pope comes from that Latin word that means bridge building. And I think pastoral council members should consider themselves also responsible for building bridges. Again, if I could offer maybe a specific example from my own parish. Two examples of this, without throwing my son under the bus. We have 4 grown children and 13 amazing grandchildren. Okay, I can tell you all about them whenever you want. But my son and his daughter, they came to us after the scandal of Cardinal McCarrick and said, we're done. We can't do this anymore. So they basically said, we're not going to practice as Catholics anymore, which broke my heart, broke my husband's heart. A few years later, we get a new pastor at our parish, who we'd known for a while, and he approached my son and said, I'd like you to be on the pastoral council. And David said, well, we don't come to Mass. I mean, we've not kept up with the sacraments. Our kids haven't. They've all been baptized, but, have not First Communion or anything. And he said, are you sure you want me? And my pastor, again, to his credit, said, that's exactly why I want you on this council. So David has really taken that seriously, of trying to bring that voice of people who maybe aren't like him to that meeting. And they've had some pretty intense conversations. Sounds like similar to what you all had as Presbyteral Council members recently. On a very practical level, they have a daycare, basically, a Mom's Day Out program. You all probably have things similar here in your suburban parishes. Well, it's declining. They aren't getting as many people, and so it's not making money anymore. So they're having a real conversation in the pastoral council about what is the purpose of St. Thomas More Mother's Day Out program. I think they call it Parents' Day Out now, maybe. But Is it really serving the people within the geographic territory of that parish, which is turning over more apartments? People who have full-time day jobs, full-time night jobs, et cetera. So there are ways to get out of the echo chamber, but you have to be intentional, and you have to understand that that's what your role is.
Yeah, absolutely. So 2 things. Bridges. I would say that all of us are bridges. When you work for the church, right? You're the bridge from the Holy Spirit, from God, out to the faithful. And then the other thing that you said earlier today is you mentioned the 3%, and how to reach beyond that. So Father Psyche, my next question is for you. Don't look scared. It's okay. So how would you recommend engaging beyond that 3%?
That's a good question. It's a hard question. I think, so I'm going to lean on my experience in my current parish assignment at the cathedral. To get people to commit, to get people to volunteer, it's very hard. It's very hard, and it's the same 3% or the same 10% who are volunteering for everything. And so, to maybe reach out to somebody new, somebody unusual, that's not on anybody's radars, and invite them in to the conversation. The other thing I'd say too is just to exude joy as you live as a parish, to exude joy. That's been one of my resolutions this calendar year, is to be more joyful in my expression. Like, I'm very joyful in my heart, but I don't always express it so well. And I think that comes from being the master of ceremonies. I've got this. I think Father Chadwick does a better job being joyful as MC than I do, but just to smile more and to, just be a little bit more energetic and effusive in my greetings to people, and let God work through that too. But don't write somebody off because they're not regular in their mass attendance, or don't write somebody off because I've never seen them before. Engage. Greet. I had an experience a couple weeks ago at Mass. There was a new person at Mass, and he was trying to kind of sneak by me after Mass, which, that's not unusual for people to not want to say hello to Father, but I said, thanks for coming, and I kind of waved at him, and he went to his car. He came back, and he said, I'm kind of interested in becoming Catholic, and I think this might be the parish. And I was kind of thinking to myself, if I hadn't been so effusive in my waving at him, would he just have driven off? I don't know. So to not be afraid of engaging just everybody with the joy of the gospel. I didn't coin that phrase, somebody else did, but the joy of the gospel, but to just live it out. We don't have to be ashamed. We don't have to be intimidated. We don't have to be shy about this great gift that we have in our faith, or the great gift that we have in our parish. And the other thing, too, is to not necessarily, as we're developing conversations or trying to address our parish structures or our outreach or our ministries, we don't have to have the final answer yet. Like, this is all engaging with God and each other about what the final answer is. Do I have the end goal of what the cathedral is going to look like when we really move towards a more synodal structure? And I don't. I have no idea, but I'm okay with that. I'm at peace with that. I'm going to let God into that, and really, take advantage of all of the goodwill, all of the prayers, all of the good that the parish is already doing, and invite more and more people into that dynamic, into that conversation. So I don't have a clear, concrete answer about how to engage more than the 3%, but be joyful, and don't come to any conclusions about anybody. Don't let prejudices get in the way when you see somebody new.
Yeah, I think you explained that perfectly. And you're right, emotions are very contagious, the positive ones, the more negative ones, and we're all ambassadors, so it's something important to keep in mind. So to close on a practical note, many people have asked, what can we do now? So Helen, what's one small, tangible step parish staff or volunteers can take to foster unity and live out synodality in everyday parish life?
I don't know if this is a small step, but I think it's a mindset maybe to shift to, similar to what you were saying, Father Psyche. There are practical things that a parish does all the time that deeply affect the people who are there and the people that we're trying to serve. Mass times is one of the big ones, right? i- if you're considering something like that, get this, maybe it's a small step, but it's my observation is when you do a broader consultation, true consultation about something like that, it'll go much better than if it becomes a mandate from Father or a mandate from the pastoral council. And by broader, I mean things like, yes, maybe it would work better for traffic control if you had a little bit more time between those masses. But how does that affect your community? Do you have people, for instance, who are in the service industry? And when do their shifts start? Some people are managing to get to that early mass because it is so early, so then they can go on and to work, right? Who's sitting there at the table asking those questions when you make those decisions? Are you getting the right people there? And so maybe just starting with that small step of saying, you know, Father, before we make this decision, can we check a couple of places maybe that we haven't thought about? Can we just talk about with a few more people? And that's, again, not changing anything big, but it's changing something huge in how you're saying we are welcoming people. Yeah, you're welcoming people, but only if they're able to get to 10 o'clock Mass on Sunday, right? Or only if you have meetings in the evenings, or only when you have Mass during the week in the middle of the day, or whatever it is, right? But if you're trying to listen to a broader community, you may discover there are other schedules out there that should impact what you decide. I hope that's simple and practical.
Yeah. So if we take that a step further, Father Psyche, how can pastors and lay leaders collaborate effectively to implement the vision, honoring both authority and the gifts of the faithful?
Don't be afraid of questions. Don't be afraid of the conversation. And I'll refer back to the Presbyteral Council meeting. The Archbishop just asked the questions. And I really do commend my brother priests. I mean, they just answered the questions. And it led into a very, very beautiful dialogue and conversation engagement. Nobody was afraid. So don't be afraid to ask questions. Even if we've been doing this for a while, is this working? Is it not working? And don't take it personal. If it's not working anymore, but it worked 5 years ago or 10 years ago, great. It worked for 5 or 10 years. It's not anymore. Ask the questions. I think, ask each other, ask the pastor, ask the staff, ask questions, and but with a real openness, a real desire for what is the next step forward? What do we do next? And where is God calling us to do? What is the mission of our parish? How do we fulfill our mission? Just don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Break down the walls and just ask the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been an incredible discussion. So thank you all for providing these questions. We are running a little bit early, so before we depart, panelists, do any of you have any final thoughts or words of wisdom you want to leave our audience? All right.
I always have a final thought. There's a couple things that I'm hearing from this conversation, the risk-taking that this will require. There is no doubt. It's what makes all of us a little uncomfortable. When Helen was telling her story about David, that's the first I've heard of it, I think, in that context. And I have to say, at first I was like, I don't know, I kind of would want a good Catholic on a decision-making body of the church. But then again, what did Jesus do with Matthew? He not only invited him to be on the pastoral council, but to be an apostle. So there is that reality of making sure, perhaps not everybody on the council needs to be a former Catholic, please, but somebody, there needs to be that voice, some way is incorporated. So the risk-taking that's there, right? I acknowledge that. And we do have to be careful about not communicating things we do not intend. But on the other hand, perhaps we have unintentionally been shoving people out as well. So we have to counter that. Second thing I think is so important is We focus, and I have focused a lot about the importance and synodality of listening, of clergy listening to the lay people, which is true, that is important. But the more I'm getting into this, the more I see the value of lay people hearing one another. Because we can come into, every parish, especially the larger ones, I think of a parish as like a universe that has multiple worlds within it. You have the early morning Sunday Mass world, you have the late Sunday morning, you have the Saturday Vigil world, and every once in a while those worlds bump into one another. And they're surprised when people think or desire something differently than they do within their own parish. That's the point. The more that the laity understand that they're just one piece of the whole, that there's other things going on and people from different perspectives, I think that actually gives the clergy more room to do their thing of leadership, that they're given that freedom. So one of the things I would hope to provide all of you throughout all of the parishes and all the institutions throughout the Archdiocese is at least permission from me, knowing my mindset and knowing where I would like to see, listening to our Holy Fathers and the call of the Spirit through the Second Vatican Council. This is the way we need to go. And being able to take that permission, if you will, if needed, in order to take some of the risks that will be necessary for this kind of pastoral conversion of our church.
Thank you, Archbishop. And once again, thank you all for your questions. Panelists, thank you. Can we give them a round of applause? All right, well, enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you.